Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. This webinar is part of a series of webinars we've been doing focusing on the Power Platform. And today I'll be handing over to my colleague, Dougie Wood, who's our Power Apps lead consultant, and he'll be talking about real life examples, best practices and governance on building a Power Platform strategy for your organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. So good morning, everybody. My name's Dougie. As Hugh said, I'm one of the Power Apps consultants here at Valto. And today we're going to be talking about building a Power Platform strategy. Okay. So the agenda for today, we're going to be having a little bit of a kind of introduction first and talking about some of the different elements of the Power Platform. We're going to be taking a look at licensing. It's very likely that some of you have already got the relevant licenses to get started with some of the aspects of Power Apps already, but we'll be taking a quick look at that. As well as the governance elements of it. So how do we kind of control the data? How do we control some of the environments and things like that? Some reusable components. So as part of that, we're going to be talking about how can you be more efficient when you're building your Power Apps and making sure you're not starting from scratch every single time. The adoption training side of things. So how can you start what we refer to as our center of excellence internally in your organization, and making sure that the right people are getting on board with Power Apps at the right time. I've included some useful resources at the end of this as well. So if you're interested and you would like these slides, we can send them over to you, and it'll have all the relevant information for you to get started creating your own center of excellence and your own Power Platform strategy. Then we'll have a little Q&A, so we should have some time left over at the end for any questions. We do have the Q&A service turned on in here, so please feel free to post any questions as we go along, and we'll come back to those at the end, and we'll go through those questions. So some of the key takeaways from today's session is understanding the licenses and sort of implications of Power Apps, identifying your data sources. So it's quite likely that you can already build Power App solutions based on the data that you already have. We'll be looking at sort of governing with a sort of admin center and some of the sort of additional functionality that you can add on to the top of that with the Center of Excellence starter kit, as well as best practices and any kind of gotchas or anything like that that I can impart along the way. So the key sort of technologies we're going to be talking about is Power Apps and Power Automate, but we will sort of have a little touch upon some of the other elements which make up the Power Platform as we go through. So just to give you a little introduction, I have a very strong background in kind of SharePoint and that side of things, but I've been working with Power Apps for a number of years now, and Valto is a fully Microsoft cloud specialist organization, and we do everything from kind of Power Apps to sort of SharePoint, Azure, and all the rest of that. So just getting started. So a lot of people, especially now they're all working from home during this kind of lockdown period, we're all used to using kind of modern applications on our phone. So things like Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, all these different things we're used to using and getting a very quick kind of experience and being able to use all this anywhere, anytime on any device. But then quite often when we go into the office, we're faced with mountains of either paperwork or legacy applications, which are slow and clunky, and it's just not the same kind of experience. The work environment is usually quite lacking behind what we have in our day-to-day kind of personal life. And that's a bit of a shame. So what we're kind of looking at is, what do businesses actually want? So what do they want to get from their data? So being able to access company data anywhere on a mobile device. I mean, that's kind of a given, like I was saying, with our kind of personal devices. When we're using things like Facebook or logging into our emails and things like that, we expect that we can access it anywhere. And that should be the same with company data. So we should be able to access that on any device, anywhere in the world. We're expecting zero downtime. So we're wanting really good kind of efficiencies. Now, Office 365 provides incredible uptime, so making sure we're always kind of got that business continuity is really important. Solutions that evolve and can scale with us. So Our Power Platform solutions are always looking at ways of how can you kind of scale, how can you make sure that it can go from being in a small kind of team to then automatically being rolled out to the wider kind of enterprise level. Securing access to files and business tools from anywhere to better serve sort of our customers. So again, providing sort of areas where you can keep things secure and safe without having to worry about things falling into the wrong hands. Providing tools that help us work together and be efficient. So again, providing Power Apps and Power Platform solutions are designed to kind of integrate multiple elements of data from different aspects, whether it be your Office 365 data and the third-party sort of data as well, and bringing that in together. We want to be able to stay connected across multiple locations. Specifically, I've been dealing with a lot of organizations which have got engineers and consultants out and about and on the road, quite often in places with poor kind of internet connectivity as well. So they need to be able to have things which have got like offline modes and things like that. And all of that is key to making sure that the data is sort of captured in a secure way, but also making sure we're capturing the right data. So quite often, especially if we're relying on paper-based processes and things like that, we can't guarantee that we're going to get the right information based on paper, because people could fill it out however they like. Whereas with a structured kind of app, you can ensure that people are guided through the process in a strong kind of user journey, so that we are capturing the relevant information, and we can then do things with that, like creating graphs and things like that afterwards. But you've got to make sure that you get the data right inputted in the first place. And we want to protect our data from viruses and malware, theft, and all the rest of it, which comes with kind of strong kind of sort of data loss prevention policies and things like that we'll take a little bit of a look at as we kind of move through as well. And consistent access across devices and tools that work together. So it's no good having sort of applications which sometimes work on the desktop, sometimes work on mobile. We need to make sure that they work in wherever the end user wants to use them. So the beauty of things like Power Apps is both all different types of the different Power Apps are available on desktop, they're available through apps on your tablet, they're available on your mobile phone. And that means you can build one app that works on multiple devices without having to worry about creating multiple different applications that work. Some work on desktop, some work on mobile. It's nice and easy to transition between those different things. So what is it when we're talking about the Microsoft Power Platform, or what is it that we're talking about? So there's multiple different products which make up the Power Platform. So the best way to kind of explain it is that Power Apps is the kind of the input of this. So this is your kind of actual application, your interface, which allows you to just actually collect information from people. They can input the information via their mobile phones or tablets and things like that. We then have Power Automate, which is the automation element of this, which will then do things like go off and seek approval from somebody, or will automate an email somewhere, or it might archive a folder or a document, or it's basically automating those manual tasks that people are doing. We then have Power BI, which is then an area which will create visual graphics and representations of that data in a very interactive way, so we can kind of visualize what is kind of going on, what is the data that we've captured. And then a fairly recent to this Power Platform sort of party is this Power Virtual Agents. Now, this will allow you to then build a kind of bot framework, which will then allow you to then deploy that in areas where you can instantly get, you're replacing almost like your first line kind of support, whether that's people ringing up or sort of posting sort of messages and things like that. You're allowing someone to have an automated kind of responses in a very intellectual kind of way. So it's all driven with AI, and it gives clever responses, and it's quite sometimes difficult to tell that it is actually automated. And also that plugs directly in with all this kind of Power Automate kind of functionality. So if there's certain tasks or certain things like a booking or something like that that you want to automate, the Power Virtual Agent can take that from a conversation with either an employee internally or a customer or supplier externally, and then automate a task based on that. So all of the Power Platform relies heavily on things like data connectors, which is connecting not only Office 365 related data, so SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook emails, all those different things. It's also connecting the third-party kind of system stuff. So if you're integrating with kind of Salesforce or Jira or any of these kind of other third-party applications, then most likely is already an out-of-the-box data connector, which will allow you to integrate with that data. We've got the AI builder, which allows us to do things like spotting patterns and things like that, and making automated kind of intelligent decisions based on things which are coming in and out. And then we've also got the common data service, which is used as a sort of database, very similar to if you think about sort of SQL or something like that. Common data service already has a bunch of prefab kind of databases, data sets that you can leverage for your applications straight out of the box. So just another little visualization here of how all this kind of comes together. So just saying that sort of we're driving sort of business process with the apps, that's the actual Power App, and pushing that information through. That data is then visualized and sort of analyzed by Power BI, and you can create nice graphs and reports that people can easily access. And flow is that automation element, so that's pushing it back round and sort of doing things. Maybe you're seeking approval for things, or maybe you're automating certain steps and tasks as well. So the very first type of Power App that we're going to be talking about is a Canvas app. Now, Canvas apps, the great thing about Canvas apps is they're actually they're one of the apps which are readily available to most people who've got Office 365 licenses. So if you have an Office 365 license which covers you for sort of Power Apps and things like that, and all the other kind of things, so that will give you access to creating these Canvas Power Apps. So the Power Platform has the sort of the visual canvas to sort of help you design and build these apps. It's kind of like a drag and drop kind of interface, so it's nice and easy to use. It's very simplistic to create, and sort of rather than using sort of complicated coding and programming like C# or JavaScript or anything like that, these are all kind of programmed with almost like an Excel, well, it is Excel-based formulas. So this also changes the sort of the demographic of the people who are creating these particular apps, because no longer do you need a kind of techie tech in the back room who it can sort of write code in his sleep. These applications are being built by people, and we're working with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So finance departments and things like that, people who are already using advanced Excel formulas to build their own kind of applications with these drag and drop apps, and then using these kind of formulas to create logic and calculations and things like that. So the example we can see here in this little screen is one of our sort of applications that we've built, which is a leave request system, which you can see we can select a new request, and we can choose like a category of sort of what type of leave it is. We can select dates, and now what's been excluded from the screenshot was pretty cool. Is what's hidden here is once you've selected these different, when the start and end date is, you'll also see an entitlement that is based on the sort of leave balance page that will come up here. And again, all of those calculations to work out people's entitlements and things like that, they're all using Excel-like formulas to do that. So we're not talking rafts and rafts of different sort of code to do this. It's very similar to what you would do if you were, say, for example, in Excel. Then once you've got all of that, you can submit that, and then that integrates with our Power Automate kind of flow, which will then push through an approval process. It will go through to the manager to ask for approval. It will give the sort of current dates about what other people have got off on that same day and things like that. And then once it's kind of approved, the flow will then go through, update the entitlements and things like that, which again, once all the entitlements are updated with the relevant information, the end users then, when they're viewing it in the Power App, will see their entitlements changing, and it's then pushing around, and it's this sort of never-ending circle of sort of the users interacting with the data, and then flow automating that and pushing through the latest values, and then the user seeing that again. The second type of Power App is what we refer to as a model-driven Power App. Now, model-driven apps start with your data, so it's modeling it on the data that you have. It's driven from sort of Dynamics 365. So if you're already using Dynamics 365 for your kind of CRM systems and things like that, this is a perfect way to get started with Power Apps. You're building up the sort of the shape and the core of the business data and the processes in the kind of common data service, which is part of the Dynamics 365. I'd say in that kind of data SQL kind of database in the background. And then you're building kind of forms and views and things like that on top of those components. And model-driven apps are very quick to generate. So compared to with like a Canvas app where you're kind of creating it from scratch really, and you're creating all the kind of interface, you're creating the controls and the logics and things like that. Model-driven apps are much more about sort of dragging, dropping, sort of pre-built controls like we can see here. We've got certain graphs and pie charts and things like that. So it's much quicker to create one of these, but you don't have quite the level of customization that you do with a Canvas app. But if it's much more about the actual data and reporting on that data and showing things very quickly, being able to quickly sort of interact with that data, model-driven apps are really useful for doing that. We'll then come on to Power Automate. So Power Automate is all about improving the efficiency of your organization by automating manual tasks. So easily create automated workflows with Microsoft Power Automate. This was previously known as Microsoft Flow. We refer to it as Power Automate now, but you may have known it previously as Microsoft Flow. You can use a simple kind of drag and drop interface that integrates with Office 365 and third-party connectors. So that's not only just using things like all the products you have inside Office 365, but if you're wanting to do things like, for example, crawling Twitter and returning all of the tweets which have a certain hashtag or something like that, all of that sort of stuff is doable. But the idea is to improve the productivity with this sort of business process automation. So an example here we've got in this kind of screenshot is a real world thing that we use. It's very simplistic, but sometimes the simple things work best. We've got across the top, you can see every kind of Power Automate workflow always has to start with a trigger. Basically, something has to start it. So whether that be a new email's received, in this case, it's a Microsoft form has been submitted, but it could be that a document has been uploaded into SharePoint or OneDrive, or we've received an email into a shared mailbox, whatever the trigger is. And believe me, there are hundreds of different types of triggers. It needs to kind of start that process. So once it's started that process, it then goes through and to look for kind of actions. So in this case, what we're doing is we're getting the response details from our Microsoft form. So our Microsoft form Microsoft Forms is just one of the Office 365 products that you get with many of the different Office 365 licenses. So you already most likely have this. And it gets the details from that response. So in this case, it's a project feedback form. So at the end of our projects, we send around a link to our customer and say, how do you think we did? Please fill out this project feedback form. They then fill out this project feedback form. And then once that's submitted, that's what acts as our trigger for this Power Automate workflow. That then goes through and gets the full details of the form. So it gets all the response information and formats it basically into a way that we can post it. And then we're using the post message to Microsoft Teams. So we have a specific channel set up in our inside of our teams, which then posts in survey and project feedback related information, so we can see very quickly how our projects are getting on. But that's just a bit of an example about how Power Automates can kind of work. You can create them based on sort of schedulers as well. So if you wanted to do something to say, run this every sort of couple of hours and automate this and check for this and do things, you can do all of that. It's worth also mentioning that with Power Automate that an automation can only last 30 days, which means it doesn't mean that it's that processes which last longer than 30 days cannot take place, but it does mean that you have to really structure the way you think your business process flow is going to work, because what will happen is from the starting point, a flow can only live for 30 days basically before it ends. So in that case, it probably means you need to map out your process so that rather than having one flow, if your process is going to last 6 months, is that you map that into multiple different Power Automate flows, so that you have certain triggers. So maybe you're waiting, so it sends an email and it waits for an email response before it starts the second Power Automate flow, and so on. So then we come on to sort of licensing. With our sort of licenses, we have the kind of plan one, which is included in most of the Microsoft 365 subscriptions. And this includes all of the Office 365 data. So this includes being able to interact with SharePoint, OneDrive, emails and Outlook, Microsoft Forms, like I was just showing before. And basically use of all the non-premium connectors. So some things you might have come up against when you're sort of looking at kind of using Power Automate and you're looking at Power Apps is there's what we refer to as premium connectors. So there's certain premium connectors that you have to pay additional for or have one of the more advanced Power App licenses. So for example, there's certain kind of calls to third-party applications and things like that that are actually classed as premium, and it's charged by that third party because technically they're responsible for maintaining that connector, whether it be sort of interacting with getting data from a particular CRM system or something like that. But that third party is responsible for it, so that's why they have a kind of premium on that. You can build canvas apps, so what we were talking about earlier, so building these kind of interfaces which interact with kind of Excel-based formulas. You can do all of that based on this license. There is the offline capability as well, so you can have things like if you're out and about and you don't have got internet connection, then you can have that form be able to save a small amount of data offline to the device, which can then be uploaded once that device is connected back to a reliable internet connection. We've got data policies, so we can do things like making sure that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But again, this is excluding some of the premium features like the premium data connectors that we were mentioning before, as well as the common data service. So the common data service, which is this kind of database and pre-built kind of list and data sets and things like that in the background, that isn't included with this particular plan. We then have Power Apps Plan 2, and now this is where you will get the sort of more advanced kind of features. So this is an additional charge on top of here. And essentially that will kind of cover off things like your sort of premium connectors and some additional kind of functionality in terms of connecting to data and using connectors which are connecting to sort of on-premise gateways and so forth. And you can see as well that the sort of capacities in the sort of applications that you can use, and the more premium license will give you sort of a more elevated version of that. So we're coming on to the governance elements of our strategy. So staying in control of our business data. Now, there's a couple of elements to this. There's the Power Platform Admin Center. So in kind of recent times, we've now got a Power Platform Admin Center, which allows us to kind of govern the environments inside of our Power Platform. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that afterwards. We can also see analytics, so we can kind of see the usage of different kind of things. So we can drill into specific areas like the Power Apps Admin Center, the Power Automate admin centers from a centralized location, and we can see analysis of what apps are actually more popular than others and things like that. And quite often what we see over a period of time is that quite often when people get started using Power Apps particularly, they come up with loads of different kind of Power Apps. They end up with tens, if not hundreds of different Power Apps. But then what they find is that some Power Apps are maybe more popular than others. There might be some Power Apps which people aren't aware even exist. And that analysis will kind of help you sort of gain understanding. And then what quite often happens is people then choose to merge some applications to say, okay, well, this one's popular, but it also could have this features from this other application. So we'll merge those two together, and it's giving a better, richer experience to the organization. We've got data policies. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through. But around this, we can block connectors. So it might sound a bit scary to people that we can actually integrate with third-party systems. So there might be scenarios where actually you don't want that to happen. So there's certain applications that you would never want a either a Power App or a Power Automate workflow to interact with that. So it can't push data outside of your organization. or bring information inside of that as well. So the Power Platform Admin Center will allow you to basically control all of those different elements and provide governance around that. And then the security layers of your kind of Power Platform. The first level is you're thinking about your tenant. So who has access to your Office 365 tenant? So that's all about thinking about sort of making sure the right people have got Office 365 licenses, making sure that you're thinking about your Azure AD security groups and things like that. And you just want to make sure you would never want to be managing things like environments or apps or anything like that in terms of giving people access directly with just their accounts. So just saying Joe Blogs at Valto or something like that. You'd want to create security groups that you can then add in and out of different applications. And that makes it much easier to manage, and you're managing it all from the same locations that you're managing your general security. So that's the tenant level. We've then got the environment level. Again, we're going to come on to talk a bit more about the environment, but the different roles within that and different levels of access. And you need to be kind of thinking about how you might be splitting out your environment to make sure that the right people have access to this. And we'll talk a bit more about this, but there's different ways you can approach this, where you can have a kind of a more open approach where there's more sort of flexibility, or you can have a more sort of strict approach where you're having kind of like your dev environments, your test environments, your production environments, and making sure that devs can't affect the production environment and things like that. Then you've got the app level of security, so you can actually control permissions to the app, so you can share the actual apps with people. So you can say this particular security group has got access to it, and you can even go as far inside the app as well about controlling certain things, like certain fields only appear to certain people. So for example, with that Canvas app that I was showing earlier on with the leave request system, there are certain tabs which only appear to the managers. So if you are part of a security group which is part of the sort of the management team, then you'll see additional tabs to kind of see what leave other people have been taking and things like that, and you can kind of see the people you're managing entitlements and things like that. So you can control not only at the app level but inside the app. And at the very lowest level, you can do it at the sort of the database kind of level, whether that be the common data service or potentially you're using SharePoint lists and using individual items. You can create, for example, like Power Automate workflows, which are changing the permissions even at the most granular item level to make sure that even if, say, for example, someone wants to do a search or something like that instead of SharePoint, they would never find the items that kind of lived in there. Also, just to mention, you might see these buttons across the bottom, the PowerPoint here, and I've added some buttons which will go straight to certain key things, so like the admin center. So I'm not going to cover off that and show that in this session, but if you would like a copy of these slides, that button will actually open up your own admin center, so you can have a good flick through and have a look at some of those elements that we've just been discussing. So a bit further on about environments. So how to structure your environment. So by default, you have a default environment called default. Now, this isn't for sort of your business critical kind of applications, and in reality, you shouldn't really be using this. Microsoft described this as the sort of the personal productivity environment. Now, this again, it can be turned off. So if you wanted to restrict this to say, actually, we don't want everybody in the organization to be able to access this, and the reason why that it's advised against that you don't have the default kind of system is it means that everybody is a maker. Everyone can create any kind of Power App or things like that they want inside there. Now, that does provide a level of flexibility that we'll talk about later on for kind of productivity applications, where there's small teams, like 1, 2, 3 people in a team, and they just want to very quickly create something which is going to help them log information into a particular sort of SharePoint list or a particular Excel list or something like that. And they can do that with that default kind of environment because it's not a business critical thing. It's just something that they want to spin up over a week or something like that, that they can quickly use to sort of gather information. We've got our kind of trial environments. So the trial environments, every user can have a trial environment for up to 30 days, and then that will expire. We've got our development environment. So the developers, so we can kind of see here, we've got these kind of three stacked approach. So you've got your development environment, you've got your test environment, which is known as sandbox environment, and you've got your production environment as well. And you can split that out into those particular areas. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But when you're thinking about your environments, it's not necessarily just thinking about splitting these out based on kind of having a development environment, having a test environment, having a production environment. It's also thinking about how to split this out potentially by department. So when we're talking about creating a new environment, we're having a unique set of data and a unique set of applications inside of that environment. So if that means that a particular department or a branch of the organization has got unique access to certain data and certain applications, it's a nice way of splitting that out to make sure that that is sort of siloed into those different areas. Also, if you're thinking about sort of the branches, or if you're a global organization, quite often there might be sort of requirements that you store data in specific geographic regions as well. So say, for example, you're an organization that you operate in the US and you operate in the UK, you can have an environment specifically for the US, so all the data is actually physically stored in the US, and then you have a separate environment for the UK, and all of that data is stored inside of the UK. So this is a bit of an infographic about how these particular environments kind of work. So at the very top, we've got that default environment. And as we can see here, everyone is a maker, so everyone can kind of create in here. And this is why sometimes it can be locked down by organizations if they don't want people to be kind of messing around with that, especially in the early days where things like data loss prevention policies haven't been set up yet, and you might be sort of worried about data leaving the organization. It might be an idea to close that off to start with. So this is about sort of communicate with everyone that the default is not for sort of development of critical apps. So the key message here is that the default area is not for critical applications. You shouldn't be using it for that. The next area is our development. Now, only one user has access to this. This is kind of like your development sort of platform, basically. So this is where the devs will be working on things. And specifically, the developer environments are completely locked down for any other user except the users who are subscribed to that sort of plan, and the applications can be moved out of that environment if needed. So basically, once they've created it in the development environment, that's when they move the applications between the development environment to then the test environment. It's also worth mentioning you want to try to reduce the amount of kind of shared development areas you have. So it's worthwhile, specifically when you're talking about business critical applications, that you split those out into having their own development areas. And that way you're not sharing kind of applications, you're not sharing the same data and so on. The next kind of sort of areas are, there's kind of two different areas. You've kind of got a more strict kind of dedicated kind of application, critical application process, and you've also got a shared kind of environment. So the dedicated one, it means that the dev and the test and the production environments for each critical application. And then the developers have the environment maker access in the dev environment, but only have access in the test and prod. So that means that the developer in this area has got the full rights, they can create it. It's only the development team who have access to it. They're building the critical application. And then from that point, they said, okay, we're now ready for sort of to pilot this and get people to test this. And they've been working on their application with their development data and things like that in this particular environment. And then they move the app into the testing environment, which is where a new set of kind of data and things like that will live, and it will mean that the pilot users will be able to access and test there. Then when that then gets decided that, yep, that's good to go, we're now going to move that into production environment, the developers don't have any kind of true access to this. They can't edit the apps or anything like that. It's purely just that the IT department can deploy those applications to the production environment, and the developers never have access to edit them, because that would then mean that they wouldn't be following the kind of correct process. And then the second kind of sort of methodology to this. So it's either you can go with that kind of dedicated approach, and then the second kind of methodology is this shared approach, where the test and the prod environments for important but medium complex apps can be shared between multiple projects or business units. Individual projects and business units should always have their own development environment to protect data. End users only have basic user access to solutions and data in production environments. So that's meaning then, if this is for less kind of critical kind of projects. And you can see here we've got these color coordination here, so we can say these are that's the critical kind of path, and these are the individual kind of project kind of paths. So this is a bit more of a shared approach. It's less kind of formal, and it's a bit more flexible, but you are then potentially allowing for things to for people to be editing things and things like that, which they might not necessarily should be. So how to structure environments. So when I was referring to before about sort of the different types of kind of application and things like that, starting at the very bottom, we've got our kind of productivity, and this could fall very well into that default environment. So a productivity app, that it doesn't require sort of high levels of governance, for example, or kind of strict kind of control. They're always usually supported by the app developer themselves. And when we're talking about the app developer, again, we're not necessarily talking about the IT department, and we're not talking about techies. These might be just people in the finance department that decided it's much easier to enter information via a Power App interface than it is by sort of typing it into an Excel spreadsheet. And usually these kind of productivity kind of applications, to get to a kind of MVP, a minimal viable product, they're a week, 2 weeks, something like that. They're not overly sort of drastic to sort of create these things. The next tier up is the important apps. So the important but non-critical, i.e. their kind of medium complexity or their scope to a particular business unit. The support of this is by the app owner, but they're kind of supported by the IT department as well. So that falls under that kind of shared kind of deployment process that we were looking at before. And we're sort of using environments to advise, but might not necessarily sort of need kind of stringent kind of approaches. And the development typically takes less than kind of 3 months to get to that MVP point of view. And then the final kind of category is this critical applications. Now, this is mission critical scenarios or high complexity or org-wide level kind of usage of these applications. Now, these are typically fully supported and owned by the IT department, and typically the deployment process goes fully through the kind of IT department. It needs to have the full kind of dev, test, prod, and things like that. And it uses a slightly longer development cycle. It's often greater than 3 months to a minimal viable product. And that's because you're going through the development process, you're going through the testing process, you're going into production, and you're making sure everything is set up. You've got multiple kind of data sort of environments and things like that to make sure that things are sort of repeated in that kind of stringent way. And the reason why we sort of break those out into those sort of kind of areas is making sure that, for example, sort of that when people are testing in that kind of UAT, that user acceptance testing area, that they're not actually interfering with any production data. So they're not actually seeing things maybe they shouldn't be seeing, or maybe they're not editing or deleting things or messing around with real world production data. So the key takeaways when you're thinking about these environments is that potentially use a service account to deploy production solutions, i.e. that means when we're talking about sort of critical level things, the IT can control that and only has that one service account all of the IT department can access, and it has it's the only account which has the full admin to the environments to be able to make changes and sort of deploy things. Reduce the shared development environment. So again, this is one dev environment per critical application. And this means that you're kind of splitting out sensitive data. And that might mean that for example, the sensitive information that the one critical application has, app A has, but app B doesn't have access to that. So that means that we're then making sure that the development team don't have access to, if they're working on the app B, they don't have access to the critical app data for app A, and we're splitting that out and making sure things are staying nice and secure. Use Azure AD security groups. So don't manage individual employees on your kind of apps and your environments and things like that. It can become really quite a job to keep track of all of that. And if someone leaves the organization, then finding which apps they had and removing them. If someone joins the organization, manually granting them to each of the individual kind of applications can be very tedious. So I would advise that you think about what security groups can you create. Are you splitting them out by department, by region, however you're doing that, and then giving them access to those different applications via those security groups rather than a sort of individual basis. And then environments with CDS in the appropriate region. So again, if you're a kind of global organization and you're thinking about sort of splitting out your kind of environments, it could be quite a good idea to split those out. So you've got an environment for sort of Asia, one for the US, one for sort of Europe, or however you want to do it. And then you can choose geographically where you want to store that kind of data. Okay. So when we're talking about data, and we're talking about what data we're kind of interacting with as part of our kind of Power Apps, think about, you can extend the databases you already have. So it doesn't necessarily mean when you're coming to create your kind of Power Apps that you are having to create a brand new database from scratch and all the rest of it. Quite typically, people get started with this by actually building Power Apps on top of existing data that they already have. So there's all sorts of different data sources you can use. I mean, common kind of Microsoft-based data sources include things like Excel, SharePoint, the CDS, a common data service, as well as SQL. But it kind of depends on what level of scalability that you're talking about that you would choose. Now, obviously, an enterprise level application, you wouldn't be choosing Excel, for example. So the way I would kind of always think about this is that if it's a small kind of team, it's a productivity application. So we're going back to that kind of scenario of there's one or two people or a small team of people who are wanting to create a quick kind of Power App which integrates sort of information rather than manually having to type it out all into Excel. They can sort of use an app which maybe is creating rows and things like that inside of Excel. So that's something small, and really you only want to be using that for the sort of things which are you're talking thousands of lines of data. When you're talking about sort of then pushing that out a little bit further and having more kind of data, that's when you want to be thinking about something like a SharePoint list, for example. And that's where you can then start thinking about more like hundreds of thousands of kind of bits of data, and it's a bit more scalable. It's easier to kind of surface that kind of information within SharePoint and create views of that data and have people kind of interacting with that from the SharePoint side of the fence as well. And then when you're talking the big boy stuff, and you're talking sort of hundreds of thousands, millions of sort of lines of sort of data, or you're needing kind of relationship kind of databases, that's when you should be really using something like the Common Data Service. And also, the cool thing about the Common Data Service is it has loads of, or if it is entities, which are basically just databases pre-built with relationships between them. So you can leverage that, so you don't have to go off and kind of create a whole new set of relationships. Quite often there are things in place that you can kind of use. Or if you've already got SQL set up, again, if you're talking very large data sets, SQL is also quite a good option for using that as well. However, there are kind of third-party connectors, so you might be talking about data which actually lives completely externally to your kind of Microsoft kind of cloud environment, and that could be things like Salesforce, so it could be like CRM systems and things like that you're wanting to kind of trigger. So every time you get a new customer, you want to automate something, so it automatically sends them an email, it automatically creates them a folder inside of your SharePoint, it automatically does all these things and alerts people, sets up a meeting for the sort of sales team to discuss it, or whatever it is. You can integrate with things like Salesforce or Jira or any other kind of task management kind of based application like Trello and things like that. If you're creating those tasks and you want to, again, automate things, then this can do that. Twitter as well. So I was mentioning earlier that you can crawl Twitter, bring back all the tweets which are mentioning a particular hashtag, for example. Or if you don't have any of that kind of stuff, but you have a kind of a custom built application, you can use kind of the API integration and make HTTP calls with sort of something like Power Automate, for example, to push and pull data backwards and forwards. So you can have a sort of Power App which maybe pushes to an app to generate a, say, quotation or something like that, and then that pulls that data back and then displays that in your Power App, allows the employee then to select from that, and it can all fully integrate with your third-party system. using that API call. So the next thing I want to talk about is thinking about, as part of your strategy, you want to be thinking about reusable components. So again, a typical kind of pitfall that people fall into is when they first start using Power Apps, they're creating everything from scratch. So they need a sign-in form or something like that on their front desk, and they create that completely from scratch. They need a expenses request form, and they can create it completely from scratch. Now, that's a very typical kind of approach, but one thing I'd kind of advise, start thinking about what elements of this you can reuse. So there's certain things in here that, say for example, like a navigational structure, so you can select and jump between different things, and you can create new items and whatever it is with this button up here. You might create that as a kind of reusable component, and then there's what's referred to as the components library, where you can then make that available to anybody who's creating Power Apps, so that they can automatically add in their own sort of navigation. So what you're doing is you're building up almost like a set of kind of tools, basically, that you then keep building on. So you create the fundamental building blocks to say, okay, well, here's a couple of different types of navigation that we like using. Maybe another kind of gotcha is the fact that there's no way of creating fully custom kind of themes out of the box with Power Apps. So a way that you can kind of achieve that is by having like a style page. So you have like some squares on a page, and then you use the reference of the sort of background color of that for everything else on the page. So you would set, say, this square to say blue, and then all of these blues would be set from that reference. If I change the reference of this to red, then these would change to red. And it's very similar to kind of like the sort of CSS kind of elements of that. So once you've kind of built some of your foundations for your sort of apps and such navigations and custom themes and things like that, it makes sense really to upload these into the component library and make them available for people to be able to reuse. Or maybe even just having some templated starter apps. So you just create 3 sort of templated apps, say this is what we always build upon, and then you use them as the foundations, and that will just decrease the kind of build time of sort of when you're sort of setting up your app. There's also, as well, if you're looking to sort of get started with Power Apps as well, there are a lot of templates as well inside the Power App kind of portal when you come to create them, and with that you can kind of see that there's all sorts of different kind of sort of apps and process and things like that, and quite often there might be something that's 80% of the process that you're already looking for, so you can select that and sort of build upon that and tweak it to how you want it to work.
So the next piece we're going to be talking about is around adoption. Just maybe Dougie's having a technical issue.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties there. So the next thing is about adoption. So within this, we're going to be sort of looking at some of the key kind of roles. Now, there are a number of kind of different roles when you're thinking about the adoption step of your overall Power Platform strategy. But the key ones that I want to identify here are the sort of the leaders. So when we're talking about that, we're thinking about the sort of CEOs and the directors and people like that. And why would this sort of Power Platform strategy be of interest to them? So I can tell you it's much quicker and cheaper to create a Power App solution than it is by writing sort of custom code. Not only is it the sort of thing that is cheaper because you can involve what we refer to as citizen developers, which we're going to talk about in a second, but it also is much quicker in the overall process. Something that would have taken months and months to build with .NET is now weeks when using Power Apps. You can customize these to your sort of business process. So if you're looking for sort of like maybe like an expense request system or something like that, of course you can buy off-the-shelf systems, but then you are very constrained to what that particular app will allow you to do. But with Power Apps, you can completely change anything you want to do. So if you wanted to add some additional steps and go for an approval, not only you wanted to start off by getting the manager approval, but you also need somebody in finance approval or something like that, and then you need a sort of head of department approval. You can customize that however you want. Whereas if you're using a third-party kind of application, you're very constrained to what they will let you do. You're already likely, if you're listening to this, you'll probably already have got Office 365 licenses. So you're already paying for these kind of Power Apps anyway in the background. So it's not necessarily even paying more for the actual license. It's more about sort of getting people on board with it, training people up and getting people using it themselves. It's much more user-friendly than kind of spreadsheet processes. So if people are saying, okay, well, we've moved away from paper-based processes, but actually we're just using Excel spreadsheets to sort of capture that, Power Apps is designed to be much more friendly to the actual end user. The end users as well on that. So it allows you to sort of create a full kind of journey that they can kind of update and kind of go through sort of end to end. And it's ensuring that we're actually capturing the sort of relevant information. So some of the things about if you're using paper-based process or spreadsheet processes or anything like that, one of the things that I hear time and time again is that the key driver is the fact that the relevant information is not being captured. So you can make sure with your Power App forms that you're asking people, okay, well, when did this particular sort of form gets submitted, so you know exactly the date and time, you know exactly who submitted it, you know key facts and figures, so you can have required fields to say, does it fit within these particular scenarios? Make sure you're choosing a category, make sure you're providing a full description of whatever it is that you're submitting, and you can really ensure that you're capturing that information. And when you've made sure that you've got that kind of information, that provides a much richer kind of experiences when you're looking at that data and visualizing that with tools such as like Power BI afterwards, because those tools are only as good as the data. So you've got to make sure that you're capturing that in sort of a relevant way. And then when we're thinking about the sort of citizen developer kind of roles, we've got the citizen developer. It's not just about being sort of IT sort of techie. I mean, it helps to kind of have a background and interest in kind of apps and sort of efficiency and things like that, but it doesn't rely on being that. So we're seeing these citizen developers, they're not necessarily members of the IT department. They're employees that have previously been using things like Excel and macros and things like that, and they've got a passion for improving the overall efficiency of their team and their department. And maybe they're familiar with using mobile applications, so it might be somebody who's already kind of used to using sort of forms and things like that on their phone and sort of modern kind of applications, so they kind of know what people would be expecting if they were interacting with that process via a mobile application. And again, these can be people from all walks of life. They can be people from sort of the finance department, where they're used to creating sort of formulas and things like that. There might be engineers who are sort of technically minded, so that they can logically create and figure out these kind of applications and things themselves. And there could be operations, so they're people who have got problems that they need to fix, things they need to automate, things need to be more efficient, and they're using that to sort of leverage those different points. So that brings me on to when we're thinking about this kind of adoption process. The very first thing that I would advise people to do if they're getting started with this is set up their own center of excellence. And what we mean by that this is a kind of a team of people who are really driving the movement of a Power Platform kind of methodology and sort of culture within the organization. So the key elements of that is about administration and governance, so making sure that the platforms are set up correctly, and that the environments are set up, and that all of that kind of elements are in place. They're nurturing the overall adoption, so they're showing people the art of the possible. They're putting together proof of concepts, and they're showing people what they can achieve with Power Apps. They're supporting people, so they're helping people when they're creating their productivity apps, so their individual apps inside of their own teams. They're helping support that, providing knowledge and getting involved with all of that, and the general operations. So they're providing that, they're helping push forward these kind of business critical applications to the wider organization. So actions on this is the first thing is you want to do is identify your citizen developers. So who are these people who have got a passion for sort of efficiency and have a kind of background knowledge in kind of a bit of sort of formulas and things like that within Excel. I would advise creating a Microsoft team for the collaboration. So what's really good when people get started with this is create a team called Center of Excellence or Power Platform Center of Excellence, and then it provides an area for people from different teams, different departments to come together to talk about Power Apps and any challenges they're sort of facing, and helping each other and supporting each other by sort of creating sort of threads and articles and things like that, all in a centralized place. So they're having their conversations, they're storing files, materials, and sharing videos, training videos, and that sort of thing. So gathering your training materials and putting that into your team. Choose a Microsoft partner for the support. So this is quite a critical element, where there's certain elements where you're going to find there's going to be knowledge gaps and things like that, and you need a kind of Microsoft partner to help you kind of support your sort of Center of Excellence team. Schedule a fast track upskilling training with that partner. So with that, you can get upskilled with your kind of key kind of users and make sure that they're familiar with that. There's certain things that we can do, like offering kind of apps in a day and things like that. So choose then from that, you want to choose a project for a quick kind of return on investment. So this might be something that's been lingering around. It might be like a third-party system which you've been meaning to kind of remove for a long period of time. So you choose that, and then what you would then want to do is gather the key stakeholders from the business to talk about that particular project and what you want to achieve. Choose what is going to be the sort of the measurements of success for the project and all of that kind of stuff. Then I'll suggest running an app in a day session to build a proof of concept. Now we support organizations with this to go from a kind of the design and the concept of the app and building that through into a kind of proof of concept, which can then go out to a pilot group of people to test, and then potentially launch a first draft of that, and then be involved with kind of an iterative review and improvement cycle. And again, I've just included a button at the bottom there, which will take you to the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, which will show you all this kind of information that you'll kind of need to get started. One sort of element of that Center of Excellence as well is the data loss prevention strategy. So when you're thinking about that, the DLP, the data loss prevention or DLP policies are actually controlled from within the Power Platform Admin Center. And a link to that is actually provided at the end of this slide, so you can find this afterwards. You can create policies to stop data from leaving your business. So again, you might be kind of concerned that data is leaving the organization and it's going to third-party applications that you weren't expecting it to, and you don't want that potential leakage. That's where the Power Platform Admin Center will allow you to control that with DLP policies. But what you will also find quite useful is when you install some of the elements of the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, there's some tools there, and one of those is the DLP Strategy app, and that's what we're looking at on this screen here. And that will allow you to sort of explore the existing kind of DLP policies and evaluate the impact of removing a connector from the business. So say, for example, you thought, actually, I don't want my organization to be able to interact with Salesforce at all. There's no reason why data should be traveling between our environment and Salesforce. So you can then choose to lock that down. But what this DLP Strategy app will do is it'll flag any affected Power Apps that removing that particular connection will break. So there might already be Power Apps which are using the Salesforce connector, and it would automatically break that for you to block it. So it'll show you the app and it'll show you who the owner of that application is, so you can contact them directly from inside of this application to say, hi, by the way, we're planning on removing this, and you can have that discussion with them and make sure that they're adequately prepared.
So Dougie, just to give a quick time check, we are running slightly over. So just in terms of kind of some of the training pieces that we offer two areas. We've got kind of app in a day, which is to help you build kind of a very quick application, and basically within that day try and develop something that you guys can take away, use, and understand how Power Apps works. And also something else that's very popular is we have token support. So if you're developing an application and you just need to get some ad hoc help, they're kind of perfect for just plugging your knowledge gaps and doing that kind of thing. And then Doug, you've got a slide on the best practices around this. So if you give a very quick overview of this.
Yeah, so some key things to take away. So be careful of delegation. So only sort of within your apps, you can only bring back up to 2K of sort of items. Ideally, you only want 500 items because this is going to start impacting some of your kind of performance. So there's certain formulas and things like that that you can use to get around the kind of delegation. So these ones here, and ones you shouldn't be using that you'll hit delegation issues is with ones like this. As before mentioned about style page, create a style page and reference the kind of colors and things backwards from that. So make sure that you can kind of get access to those colors. And if you wanted to centralize, change where those colors are located, you can just change it in one particular cell, and then that will then change everywhere else. Create a naming convention as well. So agree a naming convention with your sort of Center of Excellence team, and make sure that people are building with that. And that'll make it much easier to search for controls and things like that. And think about environments as well. And then the last thing, do you want to cover off the workshop, Hugh?
Yeah, so we offer a number of different workshops to help organizations. So if you're looking to try and put these building blocks in place, one of our most popular ones is around building a platform strategy. So that's basically sitting down with you guys for a day and scoping out some of these requirements and helping you guys understand who the best people would be, what processes and systems that you need to put in place. And at the outcome of that then is a document that will be a Power Platform strategy that you can utilize and know you've got a sustainable environment. We also offer kind of workshops around helping people build Power Apps. So if this is your first Power App and you're looking to try and get some help and guidance on building that in the best way using best practice, then kind of workshops are perfect for you. So if you want to get in touch and you want to find out about any of the kind of stuff we do, just get in touch at hello@valto.co.uk.
So just a very quick on this before we jump to the Q&A. So Power Apps really is kind of the future, and there's all sorts of different products that live inside the Power Platform strategy, the Power Platform, that we haven't really touched on today, but we'll be happy to talk to you about them. We've got things like the anonymous portals, so creating supplier portals where external users can come in and interact with your data, submit data, and sort of get that back. Automated agents, so having those kind of bot frameworks and things like that. And having sort of AI. So the future of the Power Platform includes the sort of external accessible portals, and as well as sort of creating bots and frameworks like that, and integrating sort of your automation with legacy software that doesn't have its own API. So you can do things like automating, like almost creating macros on computers where you can get data submitted into those and retrieving information as well. So apologies, we kind of run over a little bit there. I just wanted to sort of show we also have some useful links. So there's some links there to take you to your admin center, about the Center of Excellence, establishing your strategy and using best practices to secure Power Automate, and understanding the delegation limits in Canva's apps as well. So I'm just going to hand over to Hugh now, just to see if we've got some questions in the Q&A.
We've had a couple of questions which are just, will the recording and slide deck be available? So yeah, we'll send those over at the end of this. So look out for an email from myself. The question from Lucy was how many people would need a Power Apps Plan 2 license if they're all going to utilize the application and will be data inputters? Is that one that you can help with, Dougie?
Sorry, broke up a little bit there. I missed that.
So one of the question was around if multiple people are planning on using Power Apps for data input, would they all require a Power Apps Plan 2 license for this?
It depends on what your data source is. But if you're planning on using some of the more premium things like the common data service, then yes, they would need their own kind of license. But if you're talking about you're using something like SharePoint, the lower licenses will allow everybody to input into that.
Cool. Okay, thank you. This next one I can probably answer. So Lucy's looking to develop a hub within SharePoint and move and organize files. And a Power App strategy would probably come after that. So yeah, Power App strategy probably would come after SharePoint. We always see as the building block. But one of our most popular things that we like to do is an overview of the possibilities with SharePoint. So if you're just getting started out with that and you need some help on some ideas on building a hub or an intranet, then we can do a 30 to 45-minute overview and give you a good idea of what the options are with that and hopefully give you some ideas. And then a final question, Dougie, was can we also share common data service databases across environments and restrict access to them? Quite a specific one.
So the environments are basically one. You can have in an environment you can have either 0 or 1 common data service environment. So the idea is to split it out. So no, not necessarily. You're kind of having that kind of one unique environment, and that's the idea, is to kind of split that out. But you can move your apps obviously between all of that stuff as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Dougie, and thank you very much everybody else for attending. If anyone has any questions following this, get in touch and we'll be sending the video out shortly. Thank you.